Well, hey everybody, I'm Rita Dunaway here to welcome you to our COS Live program for the week. We have a great show in store today. We have an exclusive interview with West Virginia State Senator Robert Karnes. He is the lead sponsor of Convention of State Resolution in the great state of West Virginia. He's going to share the latest news, and there is some news on our progress in West Virginia, and he's going to talk about his thoughts on whether West Virginia will pass the convention's resolution this year. So you do not want to miss that. But first, to do a little bit of business and go to our Article 5 trivia giveaway with Mike Ruthenberg. Mike?
Rita, it's great to see you again. It's great to be here for another episode of Convention of States Law. I'm excited to hear about what's going to be happening in West Virginia real soon, and I know that's the subject show today. And of course, the subject of Facebook Live, the subject of the Convention of States project is to not only build a grassroots army in order to be able to use the second provision of Article 5, but also one of our strategies, of course, is to get to 34 states and to make that happen. There is one thing about the Convention of States that's important to understand, and that is, and here's, oh, by the way, here's our prize for today. I have 10 of these pocket constitutions. I've never given away pocket constitutions before. They're kind of cool because it says Convention of States right on the back. So people understand that's why we're here, is to make this little constitution have some teeth instead of that big constitution right here on my desk. That's the one that exists today. Thank you to the Supreme Court and all of the interpretations that have been given to that tiny little booklet. Our trivia question for today is relatively simple. There's been over 400 Article 5 applications in history. So the question is, and of course we know that there's been 27 amendments to the Constitution come to us by way of the legislatures, but the second way that we can have amendments to the Constitution is through an Article 5 Convention of States. There's been 400 applications. Why has there not been an Article 5 convention yet? And that's my question for today. Go ahead and pop that answer right into the comments right now. That'll help us to be even more to be spread even more across Facebook. Our engagement will go up as you engage more with this Convention of States Live. So for right now, that is our question. I'll be back at the end of the show to give you the answer. Hopefully you'll win. Back to you, Rita.
Thank you so much, Mike. Well, I'd like to welcome to the program Senator Robert Karnes, who is our primary sponsor of the Convention of States resolution in the great state of West Virginia. And I say that as a mountaineer myself. I don't know if you knew Senator Karnes, but I went to high school in West Virginia, and I went to West Virginia University undergraduate. So I have some real ties to the state. I love West Virginia, and we are so pleased that you could join us this evening. So thanks for being with us.
Well, thank you. I think somebody did tell me you were, was it Hardy County that you
That's right.
went to high school in?
Hardy High. Yep.
So that's right up next to where my district ends. I've actually got Grant County, so right next door to Hardy County is part of my district.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you giving me a chance to come on and talk about this issue, because it's something that I consider to be a very important issue.
Great. Well, we chose this particular week to have you on the program because we have exciting news in West Virginia. You have just recently introduced the resolution there. So can you tell us what that means and what's next for our legislation in West Virginia?
Sure. So introducing the resolution, is the beginning of the process. The resolution was referred to the Committee on the Judiciary, which is typical for this resolution. And somewhere in the next 2 or 3 weeks, I would hope to be able to get the resolution on the agenda in the committee. The good thing is here in West Virginia, we've passed this particular resolution out of the state Senate several times. And so I feel pretty confident that we're in good shape in the state Senate. And obviously, this year we've taken supermajorities in the House and the Senate. So I believe we have a really great shot with the new supermajority, particularly in the House, of seeing this thing move all the way through the legislature, hopefully quite rapidly.
Well, I am really happy to hear that. Now, Senator, we are a nonpartisan organization, but I think there seems to be really an increased sense of urgency about what we're doing right now. The new administration is on a path to increasing the size and scope of the federal government at a much faster pace, and even looking to remake the court system, which is quite alarming. I'd like to know, do you feel that sense of urgency, and are you concerned personally about the trajectory that America is on right now?
Well, I do have a sense of urgency, I believe, about what we're doing here. And I think that, the current administration sort of highlights that urgency. But for me, this is something that I sort of arrived independently and a little before Convention of States on the idea of an Article 5 as probably being what we need. And, at the federal level, we just have so many different directions that they're running that I believe don't comport with the Constitution, while at the same time we don't really have any teeth except in Article 5 that are left. And you're right, this is not a partisan issue. Right now, conservatives or Republicans may feel the pinch a little bit more, but I've been to several state conventions with delegates from all over the country, some from very strongly Democrat-controlled states, met a lot of Democrat legislators from around the country. And, we're just coming out of the Trump administration. And during a Trump administration, they feel the urgency more. During a Democrat administration, I may feel the urgency more. But overall, I think there's become a greater realization that what we're doing right now isn't working well for the whole country, and we really need a change.
Yeah, well, Senator Karnes, you have been not only a supporter, but really a champion of the Convention of States project for many years now. You even attended our simulated convention several years back. And just tell our viewers, why did you decide not only to support what we're doing, but to become a champion and the primary sponsor for Convention of States in West Virginia?
Sure. And so for me, a lot of it actually has to do with my children, really. I have 8 children, and as my children have grown up, that's kind of what led me into the political arena to say, hey, we need to improve things in West Virginia. But at the same time, just seeing that there's a limited amount what we can do in West Virginia, Congress, clearly is really deadlocked. We don't really get a lot of useful production out of Congress, and it's not purely which party's in control anymore, because they don't really seem to be able to accomplish big things in any way. They don't seem to be able to address big issues. And so for me, that's kind of what led me into this. I did, obviously attend the simulated convention in Williamsburg, which was, a really great experience. Again, that sort of ties back to, there were people there from both parties again. But what really caused me to sort of settle in the Convention of States, I've voted for a balanced budget resolution, and I would vote for a term limits resolution and so on. But the holistic approach that the Convention of States resolution represents, I believe, is what's actually necessary. I don't think any one of those others is capable of sort of solving the problem. So Convention of States, because it addresses federal overreach as well as federal spending, as well as regulatory questions, as well as the court system and so on. That holistic approach is really what is necessary if we're going to solve the problems that we have. And at the same time, having been to several different conventions and having again met folks from all over the country, I believe that we've got the right people out there that can take an Article 5 convention and do great things with it under the Convention of States resolution, if a convention is called using that.
Yeah, I agree. And I absolutely agree about the holistic approach of our resolution. A balanced budget amendment would be great, but without other limits on Congress, limits on spending, limits on taxation, they're just going to kick out more unfunded mandates to the states, or they're going to raise our taxes. So I certainly agree with you about that. I'm interested, how does Convention of States fit in with the other principles or convictions that you bring to your public service?
Well, I actually think, even though some people would view it as a radical solution, I think it's actually a very conservative solution. It's what the founding fathers did. They had a convention when things were not going well. They gathered delegates to a convention from the multiple states to address the issues. It fits very much in the conservative mold that we're following what the forefathers did. It also fits very much into my own personal belief that the people of this country, the people of this state, are capable of self-governance. They need to be listened to, and right now I don't think that their voices are heard the way they should be. And unfortunately, that's a bipartisan problem. That there are plenty of people in both parties that really have a very tone-deaf ear when it comes to what are needed to be solutions. But I don't think we share those problems quite so much at the state level, because we're so much closer to the voters, which again fits within my view of government by the people and for the people.
That's right. Well, as you know, our resolution would allow for constitutional amendment proposals on 3 topics: fiscal restraints on Washington, term limits on federal officials, and limits on federal overreach. In light of what's going on in Washington, D.C. today, I would love to know if you have a favorite amendment idea that falls within one of those categories and you think is urgently needed.
Well, in the state of West Virginia, we have a process we call rulemaking review. And I know that there are several other states that have a very similar promulgate rules or regulations. Those rules and regulations have to come back before the legislature to be approved by the legislature. So we have a real issue, obviously, with regulatory overreach coming out of Washington. And I believe within that fiscal restraint category might be that Congress be required to review all of these regulations that are promulgated, so that a person who actually has to go before the voters and ask for a vote has to approve these regulations. And I think right now what Congress is doing, and I don't think it's an accident, they hide behind these regulatory agencies and say they did it, not me. We need to be more willing to hold people and our elected representatives accountable for what government is doing. And I think that that's one of the things that we could do.
Absolutely. Well, before we can see any of these proposals actually made and sent to the states for ratification, we have to get to convention. And as you know, that requires that our resolution get passed in 34 states. We've already passed in 15 states, so we're well on our way. But as a state legislator, can you speak to the importance of constituents contacting their elected officials, their state senators and representatives? How important is that?
I think it's very important, and for 2 reasons. One, the other side is doing it. And so if I get 1,000 emails on a topic and they're all slanted in one direction, that can sometimes be an indicator, particularly if I'm not familiar with the issue at hand. Obviously, for me, that's not so much of an issue, but for other members that this is a new issue, they're not familiar with, receiving communications from constituents that they personally know that are in support of this carries a lot of weight. And so emails, sometimes we get the blanket emails where they're all identical, and you sort of give a certain amount of weight to how many of those you receive. But the ones that really, I think, have the effect are the personal emails, the ones that they may reflect the form emails, but show that the person has actually put a little bit of thought into it. Those are great. Same thing with actual letters. Occasionally I'll receive a letter from somebody now instead of just an email. And I can tell you that somebody who took the trouble to handwrite a letter and put a stamp on it, it's going to carry a little bit more weight than, any number of the emails that show up all looking identical. But absolutely, phone calls, again, people that aren't familiar with the issue, hearing from constituents that they know and trust, that have studied the issue, you just really can't overstate the importance of that.
Speaking to the patriots who are watching this program right now and really want to make a difference but aren't quite sure how to do it, what would you tell them? What is the best way for them to really make an impact?
I believe right now, particularly because our capital is mostly closed, so it's a little bit more difficult for a large group of people to move through the Capitol. I think that's something the Convention of States has done very well in the past, is having door-to-door visits with legislators. It's very powerful, but it's also not necessarily possible now. But live communications whenever possible, so that they actually hear, again, that voice, maybe of somebody they know, or at least they know, are from back home. And that probably means phone calls right now. I believe are probably the single most important thing that we can do. And you guys have always done a really great job at following the resolution as it goes through the process. So right now, for example, it's in judiciary, and judiciary committee members on both sides of the aisle need to hear, I believe, as directly as possible from constituents to say, hey, we really want to see this resolution move through committee. As it hits the floor, again, broadening that out to the entire Senate. And then, of course, you naturally go to work on the House. And you guys have really done an excellent job on this in the past. I feel pretty confident this year.
Well, that is really good to hear. And I know our grassroots supporters are the most amazing patriots and citizens, and they are activists. They're not just names on a list. They are activists, and we really couldn't do any of this without them. Most people know that the president and Congress swear an oath to defend and uphold the U.S. Constitution. But it's interesting that state legislators also take an oath, not only to their state constitution, but also to the U.S. Constitution. What does that oath mean to you, Senator Karnes, and how does it affect your service in the West Virginia Senate?
I really wish that it was universal. It's not, but for me, what it means is that every piece of legislation that I vote for has to be held up against that standard, or those two standards, actually. So, as a Christian, I start off with every piece of legislation. How does this fit within my Christian worldview? It doesn't necessarily mean that we're always pushing only Christian legislation, but obviously I have to take that into account because of my faith. The very next piece is what does the U.S. Constitution and then the state constitution have to say on this issue? I think if we had more universal, legislators working in that manner, we would have better government. And it doesn't have to start with the Christian worldview. It can simply start with the constitutional worldview. So much of what goes through the U.S. Congress, so much of what goes through state legislators, when you compare what they're passing with even what their state constitutions are, you wonder how they could possibly support some of this stuff, since it clearly doesn't line up with what their constitution calls for. Mm. And that's a responsibility, I should say. We have to take that responsibility seriously. A lot of times I hear people argue the merits of a particular piece of legislation when it's obvious they've never even considered, should we be passing this legislation? Even if it works great, should we pass this legislation?
Absolutely. And really, that constitutional worldview should be what unites us all as American citizens. I'd love for our viewers to learn a little bit more about you as a person. Unlike being in Congress, being a state legislator is not a full-time gig. So would you just tell us a little bit about you, your background, and maybe what inspired you to run for office?
Sure. So I for over 30 years, I worked in the IT industry. I've worked all across the United States. I love to travel, and been fortunate in that process that I've actually had the opportunity to work in every single one of the 50 states. I've worked in most of Canada and Mexico and the Caribbean. And so I've had a career that sort of took me where I really wanted to go, from a traveling perspective. And then I, at one point, obviously kind of settled down just a little bit. My wife and Amy and I have 8 children, and they're fairly spread out. Our oldest is 26 and our youngest is 8. But it's those guys. When we started having children, I moved back to West Virginia. I grew up here originally, and great place to raise a family. And then as my children started getting a little older, I said, my kids are going to have to move away the same way I did if we don't turn our state around. So that's kind of really what led me into getting involved in politics, is that West Virginia's economy has just consistently done so poorly, and it was clear that we needed a change of direction. Around that same time, my job in the IT industry has always been to troubleshoot broken systems. And around that same time, I sort of, how do we really begin to fix things both at a state level and a national level? That's really what led me into what can we do to fix things overall, and sort of step through. I contributed to federal political candidates, which almost always disappoint you, unfortunately, but some state candidates and so on. And I really kind of just arrived that we have a fundamental problem with our system. Our Constitution isn't followed, but we also don't have the mechanisms to force it to be followed very well. And so as I sort of started looking around with that troubleshooter's mind, I arrived at the Convention of States after looking through all the various other proposals out there as being the single best proposal for how we fix the country overall. But how do I create the place for my family? Well, that's a lot broader, obviously, than the Convention of States. And so the stuff that we're doing at the state level, whether it's sort of getting our tax policy back on the right line, our regulatory policies back on line in the right direction, protecting our constitutional rights. We've done a lot of great stuff with the Second Amendment in the last few years in West Virginia. We have constitutional carry now. We were one of the first handful of states to do that, and now it's kind of sweeping the nation to say we're actually going to respect your Second Amendment right and not require you to buy a permit to carry a weapon and so on. We've passed some great pro-life stuff in West Virginia, including a constitutional amendment that prevented state taxpayer dollars from being used to fund abortions. And so just across the board, I've had a lot of great opportunities in the legislature to affect that good conservative change that we've really needed here in this state. And Convention of States, I think, offers the opportunity to help spread that change across the country, which is very much needed.
Hmm. Well, Senator, our stories are similar in that I too arrived at Convention of States project just based on the sheer logic of this and the conviction that it really is the only meaningful, legal, constitutional solution to the problems that our country is facing today. I know you have to get to your official duties, so I'm going to let you go. But before I do, would you take a minute and speak directly to the West Virginians who are watching and let them know what they can do to make sure our resolution passes in the West Virginia legislature this year?
Sure. I really think that foundationally we have to start with the question of why this particular one. And we've touched on that a little bit, but again, with term limits, California has term limits, and California is a mess. Most states have a balanced budget requirement, and most states are still massively in debt because they figured ways around those. So first thing, sort of coming back to the roots, is why this works. And the reason why it works is because it allows us to take a multifaceted approach to how we can fix problems at the federal level. Earlier, I mentioned some stuff related to regulatory overreach, and that's also a piece of the puzzle. But the reason why it's important to know why to arrive at Convention of States, in my opinion, is that quite often what we face is an either or. And that's in the past where we've struggled in the House in particular is let's do a balanced budget resolution instead of Convention of States, or let's do a term limits resolution instead of Convention of States. Now, I say let's do them all but Convention of States is the right one to do. If you arrive at that conclusion in the same way that I have, again, I believe the best thing that you can do is make sure you're contacting your legislators as directly as you possibly can. And that can mean calling them on the phone here, since it is kind of difficult to get into the Capitol. But I'll also point out that what it takes to get into the Capitol is an appointment. So if you can set up an appointment with your legislator to come in and meet with them personally to talk about this issue, I think that's also a great approach to it. And then I think just talking about it to other folks back home, so that more constituents, more voters are contacting individuals in the legislature to say this is something that we really need to do, and that you would really appreciate their support on this issue. And if they could do anything within their power to help keep it moving along, so that this year is the year that West Virginia becomes the latest state in this effort. We've done so much already, but this is something that we can do that doesn't just help West Virginia, it could help our entire country. So again, direct contact is the absolute best thing. Thank you.
I'm pulling for West Virginia to be state number 16 to pass the resolution. Senator Karnes, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for being with us today. Thank you for your leadership on Convention of States in West Virginia. And thank you for your public service to the people of West Virginia.
Thank you, Rita. Really appreciate the opportunity to come on and talk about this. And my door is always open for anyone to come in and discuss strategy or concerns. So thank you again.
And now it's time for us to go back to Mike Ruthenberg for our Article 5 trivia answer. Mike?
Okay, well, another great show, as you probably were anticipating. Thanks for sticking around. And it is now time for the answer to our Article 5 question of the day. And that question, in case you were wondering, we have a prize of 10 pocket constitutions. Isn't it cool to be able to hand out the Constitution of America to anybody that you want if you happen to be the winner of this Article 5 question of the day? And the question was, if you remember, there's been 400 Article 5 applications in American history under the second provision of Article 5. Why is it that there haven't been any Article 5 conventions yet? The answer is there must be 2/3 agreement on the subject matter by the states. In other words, 34 states need to pass the application. The trick isn't just any application. Just because, for example, one organization, one individual, one state thinks there should be an application for the Convention of States along, whether it be term limits or equal rights amendment or anything, that must then maintain identical language throughout all 34 states in order to aggregate, because that's when it's a mandate, when all 34 states or 2/3 of the states agree that we need to have a convention for a particular purpose or a particular amendment. What makes what we're doing unique and probably most successful is the fact that we are not looking to have one particular amendment introduced. We have been introducing the exact language. It's been successful in 15 states so far with the same language over one subject, which is to reduce the size, scope, and jurisdiction of the federal government. That could also include term limits or a balanced budget or some sort of restrictions on the size or reduction in the federal budget. Those are all germane to this call. The reason why we're so popular, the reason why this singular call is working, is because people believe this is the answer, the complete answer to the problem of a runaway federal government. And that's the answer to our question today. I hope you learned a little bit of something out of this. I hope even more that you won these pocket constitutions. Stick around and we'll see you next week, and you'll have an opportunity to earn another prize on our trivia time. Back to you, Rita.
Thank you, Mike. You know, Americans are sick and tired of voting every 2 to 4 years hoping for a different result as we send good people to DC. It seems like no matter who we send to DC, the same thing keeps happening over and over again. The swamp grows deeper, more corrupt, more powerful, and less accountable to we the people. Here's the bottom line. The federal government is drunk on power, and it will never willingly give it up. But there's good news. The founders knew this might happen, and that's why they gave we the people the authority, no, the responsibility to call an Article 5 Convention of States to propose amendments that will drain the swamp permanently. And here's the best part. Joe Biden and his cronies in Congress can't do a single thing to stop us. This is how we can send career politicians packing, force Congress to use our money wisely, and secure liberty for future generations. It takes 34 states to call a convention of states, and 15 states are already on board. That's why Convention of States Project is working to use Article 5 of the Constitution to put the people back in charge. COS equips American patriots to reclaim our self-governance. So go to conventionofstates.com and join us. Sign the petition, share the petition, and join your local Convention of States team. Help us make history and change DC forever. And don't forget to follow us on Rumble, MeWe, Gab, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Parler, and Instagram. Check out the Battle Cry with COS co-founder Mark Meckler Sunday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And we'll see you here again next Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time for another edition of COS Live. It's time for all of us to get to work because we have a country to save. And remember, if you're looking for the person who's going to restore the republic, look in the mirror.